time. It is good to see you again.
It's nice to see you again as well, Liz.
So we are having you on because, of course, we're interested in providing some balance on the show, and this issue of hydrofracking is sort of an ongoing controversial situation. We had a Quinnipiac poll that came out that showed New Yorkers, again, this is like the 8th, 9th poll, I've lost count, 45-41 support drilling, but where it comes to the areas that really count, the upstate areas that would be more impacted, not so much. People are pretty concerned. Any response from you on that?
Yes, I've seen the poll results that you refer to. I think there's a couple things that you can derive from it. First and foremost, it's not a surprise that there's going to be a certain amount of concern out there in the public, given all the media coverage, a lot of which has been very skeptical up till now about the ability for the industry to operate safely. So,
right.
So I think the poll results really aren't a surprise. I think what's encouraging is that over time, as I've viewed it, the poll results have improved in terms of the public confidence. But I also think it's very important to keep in mind that when they refer to upstate and saying that the upstate expressed a little bit more concern than the state overall, it's a little bit of a misnomer just to use the term upstate. You need to appreciate that when they include upstate, as I understand it, they include the major metropolitan areas of Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany. And those areas are disproportionately more populous, but they're not the areas that we're talking about drilling in. So if you actually go over into the more rural areas where we focus our drilling activities, those areas, I can tell you firsthand, dealing with local officials, are overwhelmingly supportive of our activities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the more, for people who live in cities are worried at some point about water quality. For example, I know that, and we've discussed on this show, that the Syracuse area has their watershed exempted from the area that would be under what the DEC is looking at now, included in what's allowable for drilling. And so I think that people are worried in some way about environmental impacts, which is in this poll, and also water quality.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, the Syracuse area, the Skinny Atlas Lake area reservoir, is one of the areas that's exempt because, as I understand it, their water supply is unfiltered as it serves the Syracuse area.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing to understand is that the areas that are exempt primarily because of concern about surface activities. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about the word hydrofracking, but most of the time, excuse me, people are concerned about the process of interjecting water, sand, and some chemicals into the subsurface for the purposes of breaking up the rock and deriving the gas supply. But actually, the SGIS has come out and made a very distinct statement in it. And that's the State Environmental Quality Review statement. That document has made it abundantly clear that they are not concerned, the DEC, and basically their research across this country is not concerned about the ability and the science behind hydrofracking. Where their concern comes in is that you can have issues at the surface in delivering product or removing it, or even in operating on the surface, that could cause a spillage. And whether it's drilling or whether it's farming or whether it's any kind of industrial activity that involves working with different substances on the surface, there can be a concern about safety to make sure you're doing it properly.
Yeah.
So that's really what that issue is about.
Yeah, it also seems to me that generally speaking, New Yorkers believe that jobs will indeed be created, and you know that's sort of a balancing act between is it worth the environmental impact, whether below ground or above the ground, as you're discussing here, and versus creating jobs for areas that haven't had jobs for quite some time. You know, we had Mark Ruffalo on. I'm not so sure if you saw it or not, but you know his standpoint, I'm sure, and the folks who are opposed have been challenging the question of exactly how many jobs would be created that would stay in New York, and also that would go to New Yorkers who might not necessarily be trained in drilling, that you might have to bring folks in from somewhere else.
Well, you clearly have to bring folks in initially until you get the opportunity to do local training. But we are working right now with a number of universities and community colleges and even high school BOCES programs to help them provide the training so that you will ultimately have the individuals residing right in these communities that can do the work. And believe me, you know, from a business standpoint, it's far more preferable to have local people who are comfortable with our climate, who are with their family and friends, to be working for us on a long-term basis. And this is a long-term venture. The other thing, though, I want to make abundantly clear is there isn't a trade-off here between a risk to the environment versus economic development. That's a non-starter as far as we're concerned. We start out with the basic understanding that this can be done safely, has been done safely, and will continue to be done safely. And then we can focus on all the economic benefits, and they are significant. There's no question. All you have to do is look across the border into Pennsylvania. You're talking about tens of thousands of jobs being created, literally billions of dollars of economic commerce and development that is being contributed to the economy.
Yeah,
when you think about upstate New York and what that could mean, that's tremendous. But it isn't going to come at the expense of the environment.
Well, but in Pennsylvania, Dennis, I think a lot of elected officials, even some folks who would suggest that they actually might be in favor of hydrofracking, don't want to replicate exactly what's gone on in Pennsylvania here in New York.
Well, first of all, I point to the economic side of Pennsylvania.
Right.
On the regulatory side, I think it's important to understand that New York has already been at the forefront in terms of environmental safety. The former director of the DEC, Oil and Gas Minerals Division, for 25 years, spoke at a conference recently that I attended, and he pointed out that what Pennsylvania just recently put in place in December of this past year for casing and cementing, and basically the process by which they protect the water supply during the drilling, those rules that Pennsylvania just put in place in December have been in place in New York State since the early 1980s. So what I'm trying to do is point out to you, and now the new rules that are being proposed out there are even more of a safeguard. So what we need to understand is we can look to Pennsylvania and elsewhere for the economic opportunity and the benefit, but we also need to focus on New York in terms of environmental compliance.
I just want to...
There's no place...
Please,
yeah, go ahead.
Finish your thought. There's no place...
No, there's no place quite like New York in terms of putting first and foremost the environment and safety, and that's why there's been a tremendous record over the many decades that there's been drilling activity in New York State, because you've got a regulatory agency with the DEC that is very competent and is very diligent. And I know the issue comes up, well, they've had some staff reductions.
They have. Yep, they have.
But the expectation is that as the industry is allowed to move forward, there are going to be additional permit fees, and of course we're going to generate a lot of tax revenue, and all of those things can contribute to proper staffing. And the DEC will only allow the progress to take place that's consistent with their manpower to not only process a permit, but also to inspect the well drilling process as it takes place.
Dennis, we're going to run out of time, and I just want to ask you this because I thought it was particularly interesting. When I did speak to Mark Ruffalo, he suggested that there's going to be an ad campaign from the opposition. There's already a pro-ad campaign, if you will, from one of the big drilling companies, big oil companies. I've seen the ad myself a couple of times. But he also suggested that if, in fact, this goes forward, that some of these activists might try, nonviolence and actually maybe getting arrested to the tune of what we've seen down in D.C. In opposition to some of the oil pipeline development. I just wonder, what are you prepared for that? Have you seen that sort of thing before?
Well, I'm not sure with Mark Ruffalo, where his expertise comes in. I know he's an actor. Maybe he feels this is another performance. I'm not sure. But I think the important thing is if we properly educate people and give them a better understanding of how this has been done safely and will continue to be done safely, I would hope we would take a lot of the motivation away. I know there's a certain element out there, and I can't speak for Mark Ruffalo as far as where he is and where he is on the understanding curve, but I would hope for most people that if they have a proper understanding of how this can be done safely, they won't feel the need to be sort of throwing their bodies in front of the bulldozers that's coming in to clear the pathway to create an opportunity for the local farmer who probably will preserve his farm by this drilling opportunity, and the local communities that will have more of a tax base to pay for schools and other things that are very challenged in New York State right now.
Okay.
So
well,
I hope that the people out there will ultimately have a proper education, and with that, the motivation for some of the things that he was suggesting will be removed by a proper education. Okay.
Well, with some time off yet, so I'm sure we've got quite a bit of time in terms of the education component. We've been trying to do our part, and I want to thank you very much, Dennis Holbrook, for being with us. It's good to see you.
It's always a pleasure, and seriously, any opportunity there is to come back and provide further background or information, I'm more than happy to oblige.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.